Hi Noteboard Gamers and welcome back to Noteboard Gaming. I'm your host, I'm Mark. Now in today's video we're going to be reviewing the solo experience of this game right here, which is of course the Lord of the Rings Fate of the Fellowship from Z-Man Games, designed by Matt Leacock and based on the Pandemic system. Now full disclosure, I've not played that many Pandemic games. I've played the original Pandemic, I think, once, and then the only Pandemic system game that I played is actually the Cthulhu one. I can't remember what it's called. I'm called the Cthulhu or Pandemic Cthulhu, etc., which my wife quite likes. I think it's probably a cut down version of Pandemic, but my wife quite likes that game. So, you know, it's I don't come to this with a massive amount of knowledge on how the Pandemic system works. Obviously aware of how it works, but not a massive amount of knowledge on it. However, so this game, designed by Matt Leacock, based on the Pandemic system, obviously set in Middle Earth, and it's a one to how many players? 1 to 5 player game, and it says here the play time is between 60 minutes and 150 minutes. Obviously, the more people that you have, then generally the longer it's going to take. Set in Middle Earth, and you are going to take on the roles, and multiple roles, certainly in the solo game, of your travellers throughout Middle Earth. Frodo and Sam, or maybe it's Galadriel, or maybe it's Gimli, or Gandalf, or Aragorn, or Legolas, or Gollum, or Arwen, or Eomer, or Eowyn, or Merry and Pippin, or Faramir, or Boromir. You see, you can choose from any of those to kind of form your party. Now, as I say, it's 1 to 5 player. I originally picked this up at UK Games Expo back in June, and we were setting it up one night in the open gaming to play. There were four of us there. And the game's developer walked up, and this is Kevin Ellenberg, and he said, "Hey, I developed this game. Do you want me to teach you how to play the game?" Which is fantastic. So I think we started at about 11 o'clock and finished at about 1 o'clock, something like that, and had an amazing time being taught how to play the game by the game's developer. We played the introductory scenario, and we won that introductory scenario. So in the multiplayer game, each person is going to take 2 characters, and you will use both of those characters on your turn. You will take 4 actions with one character and 1 action with your other character that you've chosen. Now, you can obviously swap and change that on subsequent turns. So, you know, 4 actions with one, and then 1 with one character with the characters, and then maybe on the next turn you take 4 actions with the second character and 1 action with the first character. However, in the solo it works quite differently. So in the solo you're going to choose 4 characters to play with plus Frodo and Sam. Now, each of your characters, you're going to do it in turn order, so you're going to lay them out left to right with Frodo and Sam slightly off to the left there, and you will carry out 4 actions with one of your characters and 1 action with Frodo and Sam. Now, that Frodo and Sam single action in the solo game can be taken before your 4 actions or after your 4 actions. When you've done that, you will then finish your turn by taking the player cards and turning over some of the threat cards, whatever they're called here, and then you'll move it on to the next character. You'll move the marker onto the next character, and that character will take 4 actions plus 1 action with Frodo and Sam, and again that can be before or after. So also in the multiplayer game, each player will get a hand of cards, and you may well collect some various tokens throughout the game as well as on the multiplayer game. In the solo it works differently, of course, because there's only you, so you have one hand of cards, which you will use for all characters. So it's a common hand that all characters use, and same with the tokens that you collect as well. So it becomes a slightly different. Also, there's another change in there that one of the actions is, I think it's the Fellowship action that you will use in the multiplayer game. You wouldn't use that in the solo game because that's about kind of swapping cards if you're in the same area as other people. But other than that, it plays more or less exactly the same as the multiplayer game. So what is Lord of the Rings then? I say it's based on a Pandemic style system. You're going to be given a number of objectives at the beginning of the game, or you're going to take a number of objectives at the beginning of the game, and generally there is one objective that you will always put in, which is going to be destroy the 1 ring. That has to be completed after all the other objectives are complete, and that means kind of taking them over to getting Frodo and Sam over to Mordor, giving out the right amount of cards and throwing them into is it Mount Doom, maybe something like that? Yeah, throwing them into Mount Doom. If you do that, you potentially win the game. There's other things that may happen, but then you will choose some other objectives as well for you to carry out in the game. In the standard game, I think it's 4 objectives in total. You can have a longer game which has got 5 objectives as well, so you can alter the difficulty of it as well. And it gives you some suggested objectives to take in the back of the book, but then you can make up your own. Some objectives require you to have certain characters on the board, so you'll have to choose certain characters, but it's not prescriptive across all the objectives, so it's not like you can, your team is prescribed for every single one. You can then freely choose amongst the available characters to do that. On your turn, I say, you're going to take some actions, and those actions are going to be travel. You're going to move across the map. In the multiplayer game, you've got the fellowship action, which you can take, which I say is swapping cards between hands. You've got the prepare action, which is slightly different in the solo game, and that means if you're at a haven, you can discard a card to take a token with the same symbol. If it's in the solo game, that card must match the region that you're in. Why is that important? Well, you see, most of the cards that you get through have got these symbols at the top, which are various tokens. So you've got like stealth, and you've got attack, and you've got the rings, etc. But you are limited to a hand size of 7 cards. Now, one of the key objectives for the One Ring is to discard either 5 tokens or 5 cards, or a mix of both, which have got these kind of ring symbols on there. Of course, if you're saving that up for Mount Doom, that means that you're clogging up your deck or your hand, so to speak. So it is quite important to be able to get tokens so that you can free up your hand and have more cards available. The other thing you can do is you can, as an action, you can muster, and that is at various points on the map. You have some icons on there for the various armies that you've got, and then you can spend a card that has a particular symbol on there, which has got, it's like a heart on there, which is this. Okay, which I don't know if you can see that. It's got a kind of heart symbol at the top there. That then allows you to then recruit troops, and you're going to need those troops because the next thing you can do is attack. If you're in the same area as some of the shadow troops, you can attack those shadow troops, and that involves rolling dice in the rather wonderful dice tower that comes with the game. Look at this. This is rather great, basically. So you would roll some dice depending on how many people you got there and how many dice you choose to roll, and those results you can either lose on your side or on the shadow people's side. And then you can also capture as well. There's things you can do in various strongholds. I've managed to capture one on the board here, which is a stronghold. You can take one of the shadow strongholds and then capture that stronghold. So you can get 4 actions, as I say, plus 1 with Frodo and Sam, and that's the actions that you do. Then what you're going to do is you are going to draw a couple of cards from the player deck, and these cards are mixed up with various cards. You've got the kind of standard cards, which have the symbols on the top. You have something called event cards, which you will have in your hand, and they will generally give you positives that you can do. But also you have these skies darken cards as well. So you have a number of them in the deck, depending on the length of the game and the difficulty of the game that you want to have as well. And these are put in there and then shuffled in randomly in places, etc. And this kind of progresses the game. You increase the threat rate. Why is threat important? Well, threat is important because at the end of your turn, after you've done this, you're going to draw some of these cards, basically, and that is the number that you draw. It's dependent on the threat level on the board, and the more of them you draw, then the chances are the more bad things are going to happen on the board. The troops are going to move and various things. Okay, so that's the first thing that's going to happen on there. The next thing that's going to happen is the Eye of Sauron. If it's in Frodo's area, then Frodo's going to lose a hope. Hope is a timer in the game. If you lose all hope, then the game is lost, basically. But if you're not in Frodo's area, it's going to move to Frodo's area. Then you're going to add a number of the shadow troops, that's these red ones, onto certain places on the map, and as they grow, they will start moving around the map as well and looking to destroy your safe havens, etc. And then you will shuffle any of the cards that you've had, any of these cards that you've already used, you will shuffle them back and put them on top of the deck. And what that means is that you will start to see emerging patterns. You will start to see shadow troops particularly marching towards certain regions because you're going through those cards again. Now, the number of cards that you get through on here is, it's difficult to say because it all depends on where these Skies Darken cards are in the pack. So you will do this, you will take 2 of these cards, as I say, and they're either standard cards, they are event cards or Skies Darken, and then you will resolve these cards, which these are the kind of bad things that happen. And you'll see from this that there are 2 different backs on the cards. Okay, so what happens is you would turn the top card over to show its front, which is this, and then depending on whether the top card on the deck that is behind is red or black, if it's red, you carry out the action at the top, and this is how the troops march across the board, okay? And if it's black, you carry out the action at the bottom, and this is how you add troops to the board and also potentially bad things that happen. And you'll do that a number of times depending on the threat level. In my current game, the threat level is currently 3, so I have to do 3 of those after every one of my characters' turns, and you start to get this kind of rolling kind of horribleness that starts to happen basically, and the game starts to get progressively harder. So all the while you're trying to complete your objectives, and I say you've got to complete those objectives by the time you get to putting the one ring into the fire, into the Mount Doom, and trying to win the game with Frodo and Sam doing that. But all the time the board is dogpiling and moving on you. Key differences with the solo, as I say, is you're going to move along character to character, okay? And your character will do 4 actions and then 1 action with Frodo and Sam, or 1 action with Frodo and Sam, and then 4 actions with themselves. Whereas in the multiplayer, it's 4 actions with one of your characters and 1 action with other character. So Frodo and Sam are always on the board, basically, on the solo game, as they should be, because I think you have to do 1 ring in every scenario there. But yeah. So you will kind of do 4 actions, you will draw 2 cards, and then you will draw the shadow cards, or as many as the threat is on there, and that will keep piling on. Now you have various things as well. You have these wraiths that are going to be moving around the board as well, and these are going to be shifting around the board. Some of them start in Mordor, some of them start on the board already, and they will shift around the board. Why is that important? Well, if Frodo and Sam move into an area, into a place in an area where there's wraiths or shadow troops on there, so if wraiths in the area or shadow troops are on there, they have to roll these kind of search dice, which are these here. These are going to start eating away at things like hope, etc., which starts moving the hope down from there. Frodo and Sam have actions that you can take to avoid that, and you can certainly spend any cards that have the kind of sneak symbol, which is the cloak on there, okay? Or you have the sneak token, you can spend those to avoid rolling a search, but eventually at some point you're going to search. So that's going to happen as well. Also, as you move across the map, you can instigate battles between your troops and the shadow troops, or maybe as they're moving, they instigate battles as well. Now, what happens when you instigate a battle is, first of all, the Eye of Sauron is going to move there. His focus is shifted to where that battle has been taken. And if that battle's happening where Frodo is, oh my God, let's hope you don't draw a shadow card, because that's going to start eroding things there basically for you. So the Eye of Sauron is constantly moving around, scanning Middle-earth, looking for Frodo and Sam. So you will take the battles, and then you will roll these dice for the battles, as I say, and you will start removing either troops on your side, troops on their side. But all the while, as the game progresses, as you're doing these shadow cards, what's going to happen is that more shadow troops are going to go on the board. They're going to start moving around the board. They're going to start potentially wiping out your havens, leaving you with less troops on the board than you actually want on there. So you've got to try and manage multiple kind of things going on at the same time. And that's a key thing about the game, is not only you're trying to do the objectives, you're trying to build up your troops on the map, you're trying to position Frodo in such a way that the eye is never really on there, also help them mitigate their searches. Each character that you have has asymmetric abilities on there as well, so it's a case of picking the right party and thinking, right, I can do X, Y and Z with that, but also maximising when you use their actions, their asymmetric actions on there. There's a lot to keep on top, and all the while the kind of the clock is ticking, because if you run out of these cards, this is another timer for the game, that is game over. If your hope goes to 0, that is game over. So there's a number of ways, it's like all these games, there's a number of ways to lose a game. The only one way to win the game is to complete all the objectives and throw the ring in Mordor. So that's kind of an overview on what the game is and how it plays itself. So, on to my thoughts about Lord of the Rings: Fate of the Fellowship from Z-Man Games. Look, I didn't know massive amounts about the game before I bought it. I was obviously slightly aware of its existence, but I hadn't really done much digging. First of all, I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I like Lord of the Rings enough, but I'm not a huge fan. And secondly, as I say, my experience with Pandemic is, it's passing at best. However, when I got the opportunity to buy it at UK Games Expo, I thought, yeah, and we literally played it the night that I bought it. I say, and Kevin helped us learn the game, and that was a great experience. But it really kind of brought the fun, and certainly from a multiplayer perspective, we all had a fantastic time. There were 4 of us plus Kevin, so 5 players playing the game. We all had an absolutely amazing time, and it was really good kind of working out who did what and looking at that interplay from a cooperative perspective, which is really kind of crucial when you're playing a kind of co-op game like this, or Pandemic, etc. Wondering how you all bounce off from each other is really, really critical. So that was really, really, really good. And I think, the game obviously shines as a multiplayer game, and you can play it solo as a multiplayer game. There is absolutely no problem with playing it the traditional way. You're just going to multi-hand everything. There's absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. It will work perfectly well from doing that. But of course, they built in the solo mode, which takes out that need to multi-hand. So you haven't got, you're still controlling 4 characters if you're playing it as two-handed, I suppose, solo. But one of those characters would have to be Frodo and Sam, of course. So, it kind of reduces that. It gives you 4 characters, so it gives you that ability to then create a party that you think will assist and help Frodo and Sam, whilst allowing you the ability to do that. But what it does miss, obviously, is, from a solo perspective, is what we do as multiplayer games is you have different approaches to things. As a solo gamer, it's your mind. You're using the elements that you've got in front of you, but you're going to come up with a plan, and you're going to be pretty much fixed in that. Solo multiplayer obviously allows for different perspectives to come into play. Yeah, that's just how solo games work anyway. But you've got to be aware of that. It becomes a very dynamic puzzle as a solo gamer, as opposed to a cooperative experience potentially from if you're playing with others. But that's just the nature of solo gaming. Most solo games become that. I do enjoy the solo mode. Do I enjoy playing it solo? With the solo mode more than I enjoy playing it cooperatively solo by having 2 hands. Well, I played it both ways, and I must admit, I'm still torn between the two. I have a slightly different experience in playing them both ways. I think for ease, the solo works great, but it allows... the solo works absolutely great, but I do like that cooperative way of just juggling the characters that I've got. And potentially, I could play it 3-handed solo if I wanted to. I'm not going to, but I could play it 3-handed. But just bouncing off a little bit more and having a little bit more flexibility certainly helps from that. Solo, I think, is potentially more challenging. As I say, you become a little bit more rote on what you can do, a little bit more, not on rails, but a little bit more focused on what you can do. So I think solo becomes ultimately a little bit more challenging. And the game, by its very nature, can be a little bit swingy as well, due to the fact of the cards that you're pulling out. Where the Skies Darken cards are. The fact that these cards are, the shadow cards as well, what comes out there, you can have a bad run. Of course you can have a bad run, and that's just the nature of how the game works, is that, the setup is universal, apart from some setup that happens when you then choose some of the shadow cards to say where some additional troops are going to go. But as you progress the game, it can be a little bit swingy. And also, it's got dice in there. So there is a large element of luck based on dice rolls. And you can have some great dice rolls. And I've had some fantastic dice rolls. And you can have some absolutely lousy ones as well, which can absolutely kill the game. Like all these games, you're going to start off kind of feeling strong, feeling positive, thinking, yeah, I've got this in the bag. And you're feeling your way around the map and understanding what's there. But then you then get to a position where you're like, the game's turned, and it's starting to become very difficult to actually see a way to win the game. And I think that happens more from a solo perspective, and the reason behind that is you get 4 actions on your turn, okay, and 1 for Frodo and Sam. And from a solo perspective, as you're only doing one particular character at that point, it's highly likely you could be in a position where there's nothing really optimal to do. And I've had that happen to me on solo. There's nothing massively optimal for me to do. I can't add to anything. I can't travel because I'm exactly where I need to be. I don't need to travel. I'm traveling for the sake of it. I can't muster. I can't do any of the other stuff. So I waste a turn with that and maybe just carry out a turn with Frodo and Sam. From a cooperative perspective or multiplayer perspective, that works differently. Because you have 2 characters, the chances of them both being in a position where they can't carry out any actions is obviously very, very limited. So you may do one action with the character you can't do much with, or forgo one action, but you've still got 4 actions you can do with your other character. Doesn't happen that way in the solo version of the game. You're potentially just going to skip over. You know, it doesn't happen a lot, but it absolutely can happen, and probably does happen at least once per game, is that I have characters and I just think, yeah, I'm just going to move straight on. Draw 2 more cards, draw the shadow cards, progress the game that way. So that can be a little bit frustrating from a solo perspective. It's just the fact that it feels, you know, sometimes, occasionally, things can be, you feel a little bit wasted. However, it doesn't detract from the fact that, you know, you still have a lot of fun with this game. Now, I say I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and so some of the lore and etc. is a little bit lost on me. When I first played it multiplayer, I was with Mike Dennis from Ready Steady Play, who knows Lord of the Rings inside out, back to front, and he could see, you know, where things are coming from the books and what would happen, etc., and what was thematic in this. So I'm sure some people will have an opinion on that as to whether it's thematic. Does it feel like you're just potentially pushing stuff around, you know, cubes around on a board? Not cubes, they're meeples, etc. No, I don't think it does. And that comes down to the player, of course it does. You can see it as a very mechanical experience. I'm doing this because the card says I do this, X, Y, and Z. Or you can see it as a thematic experience. Oh, you know, here's Aragorn rushing in to save the day. I'm somewhere caught between the two. You know, it's not totally thematic, despite the great presence and how it looks, and the production quality, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I'm somewhere between the two. I make a bit of a story and make it stick somewhat, but in reality, you know, I do look at it as a dynamic and slightly and a dynamic puzzle with mechanics, not a mechanical puzzle, but a dynamic puzzle with mechanics. So, you know, depends on who you are. Solo game perspective, it can escalate fairly quickly, and you can be in a position where you can't do anything about it, and therefore your game can come to a premature end where you may have only completed a couple of objectives, or you may get rather lucky with the cards, with the dice rolls, etc. And some of your planning, it's not all down to luck. It's not a purely luck-based game. There are just elements of luck in it. But I think more so from a solo game, you can see when a game is not going to go your way and potentially be, you know, inclined to call it sooner than playing out the full game. So yeah, I really enjoy the game, and I think it is a game that will work for a lot of people. I think, though, the more you play it, I'm not saying it's solvable, but it becomes parts of it. Like, you've always got to do the One Ring quest, etc. So you may get in a position where you know who you need to put in, or what you need to do in there, or how to position it so you can be in that position to do that. So you're going to get better of it as a group, and maybe as a solo gamer. It's not solvable 100%, but I think there's an element of that. You'll have played it enough times at some point you think, right, I've probably done everything that I want to do on it. However, for me right now, I'm having a lot of fun with Fate of the Fellowship. You've got to, I think, you know, if you're going to enjoy it, you've got to enjoy an element of randomness in your games. You've got to understand that it's not all deterministic, not by a long stretch of the imagination. You've got to know that it's slightly imperfect, that it, you know, setup is not necessarily a chore, but for the first couple of times, it probably feels like, God, what am I doing? All the information is actually on the map where you need to put things apart from where your characters go, depending on the characters. Not even that's on the map. But yeah, it can feel like a bit of a chore when you first get the game to set it up, but it's not. Once you've played it a few times, it's absolutely fine. The board can get a little bit full, certainly with the race kind of going around. If you get a lot of them in one area and some of the small areas, you might think, oh, geez, how do I get everything on there? And it does have a dogpiling mechanic as well. As things progressively get worse and worse throughout the game, you better have a plan to come out of that. But however, I have a lot of fun with Fate of the Fellowship. I've got it to a position now where I can set it up fairly quickly. I can play a game in, depending on how well it's doing, in round about an hour or so, and have a good time doing it as well. The dice tower that you get with it, what a great addition that is. Completely unnecessary, of course. You don't need the dice tower, and some people choose not to make it, but I like it. You know, once it's made up, it stores nicely in the box amongst everything else. I think the production quality is absolutely fine on this. You're probably going to want to sleeve your cards. Excuse me, I'm not a card sleever. You're probably going to want to sleeve your cards if you know, because you're going to be kind of shuffling these a lot, not per game, well, these certainly per game, but these a number of times in the game, but these every time you play the game, you're going to be setting those up differently. Look, it's not rules heavy. You'll be able to get to grips with it fairly quickly. Then comes down to the solo. I think the solo mode works great. I think it's more challenging than cooperative, and I think it does have the problem that you will get characters where you just can't do anything, and it feels like a bit of a waste of a term, and all you're doing is making the game worse. And that can be a little bit frustrating, and it will happen more or less every game you play with at least one character, but that's okay. For me, I don't mind that. I've now built it into my thinking for the game. Do I prefer it to play it solo multi-handed? Do I prefer it solo? I'm still on the fence. I can't tell you. I think for simplicity, solo. For having more ability to do other things, then it's multi-handed solo. I'd love to play it with other people. I think it's a great game with other people, but I do highly recommend it for solo. I think you're going to have a great time if you don't mind the pandemic system, if you don't mind crisis management as it can feel, if you understand that the board can feel a little bit cluttered and the game can be a bit swingy, and you've got an element of randomness in it, then you're going to have an absolutely fantastic time. So do not forget, though, big tip is do not forget to prepare your cards and at least try and get tokens in place of cards so you can increase your card hand size. That's a key factor in the successful games I've had, is making sure I'm maximizing the cards. Of course, the more cards you get, the more cards you draw out of here, and you're going to do 2 every turn, the more chance you're going to get some Skies Darkened cards as well, which are going to progress the game even further. I have a great time with it. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I don't score my games. I think it's probably going to feature in my top 10 games of the year by the end of the year. I will happily play it any time with anybody, as well as playing it by myself. So yeah, I'm really impressed with what they've done with Fate of the Fellowship from Z-Man Games. And from a solo perspective, the solo works really, really well. You will have to make your own mind up as to whether you want to play it from the solo or you want to play it multi-handed solo, but whichever option you choose, you're going to have a great time. Be prepared to lose a number of times, but once you start mixing up those objectives, you get this, not infinite, but you get this wonderful kind of playbook that you can mess around with the games, and sometimes the game is absolutely going to screw you over. You might feel a little bit bitter. You'll probably set it up again and go straight back in and have a better time with it. Yeah, really enjoying Fate of the Fellowship. I do recommend it from a solo perspective, and I do recommend it from a solo multi-handed perspective, and certainly from a cooperative perspective. I think it's a great game. I'm really enjoying my time with this. Yeah, there we go. That's Fate of the Fellowship from Z-Man Games. So thank you very much for joining me on this journey through Fate of the Fellowship from Z-Man Games. My name's Mark. This is Not Board Gaming. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Check out my other videos. And one final thought, if you can't find anyone else to play with, then there's nothing wrong with playing with yourselves. Until next time, bye-bye.